In the summer of 2025, the United Kingdom found itself at the center of a heated national debate. What began as a local incident in a small town quickly escalated into a nationwide protest movement. It all started in Epping, Essex, where a tragic event ignited public outrage. An Ethiopian refugee was arrested on charges of sexually assaulting a young girl. The incident spread like wildfire, sparking widespread anger. However, this wasn't just about the assault. It became the catalyst for a larger issue that had been brewing for years: immigration. Specifically, the UK government's policy of housing asylum seekers in hotels. The government's decision to house refugees in hotels across the country had already been a controversial topic, but this event pushed the issue into the spotlight. As news of the incident spread, protests erupted. What began as a reaction to a specific event quickly grew into a protest against the broader issue of immigration. Thousands took to the streets, demanding that the government stop using hotels to house asylum seekers. The protesters argued that these policies were causing strain on local resources and creating tensions in communities. In the heart of London, protests intensified, with demonstrators gathering outside the Britannia International Hotel in Canary Wharf, one of the many hotels used to house asylum seekers. The protesters felt that this hotel, along with many others, had become a symbol of the government's failed approach to immigration. What started as a small protest in Epping soon spread across the nation, gaining momentum with each passing day. But what were the reasons behind these protests? What were the protesters really upset about? The answer was simple: frustration with the government's failure to effectively manage immigration. The hotel housing policy, which was initially intended to be a temporary solution, had become a permanent fixture, causing resentment among local communities. People felt that their neighborhoods were being overwhelmed by an influx of migrants, without any proper planning or support from the government. As the protests grew larger and more widespread, tensions between the police and demonstrators escalated. Violent clashes took place, leading to broken windows and damaged property. The police, struggling to maintain control, made several arrests, only further fueling the protests. While some of the anger was directed at the government's immigration policies, other protesters were specifically targeting the use of hotels as housing for asylum seekers. The question on everyone's mind was simple: why were these hotels being used for long-term accommodation for migrants? The answer lay in the increasing number of asylum seekers arriving in the UK. By 2025, more than 50,000 people had crossed the English Channel, seeking refuge in the UK. The government's response had been to use hotels as temporary housing for these asylum seekers. But what was meant to be a short-term solution had become a long-term problem, and the public was increasingly frustrated with the lack of action from the government. In response to the growing unrest, the government issued a series of statements. Prime Minister Keir Starmer addressed the nation, condemning the violence that accompanied some of the protests, while also reaffirming the government's commitment to supporting refugees. He emphasized that the UK had a duty to offer help to those in need, but also acknowledged the challenges posed by the increasing numbers of asylum seekers arriving in the country. Starmer's statements were intended to calm the situation and reassure the public that the government was taking action. But would these words be enough to placate the growing discontent? The government knew it needed to do more. In the wake of the protests, the UK government announced several measures aimed at addressing the concerns raised by the protesters. The most immediate response was to speed up the processing of asylum claims. Long wait times had been one of the main complaints from both the public and migrants, and the government vowed to reduce these delays. In addition to speeding up asylum processing, the government also announced plans to improve the housing situation for asylum seekers. Rather than relying on hotels, the government proposed creating new accommodation centers specifically designed for refugees. These centers would be safer, more secure, and better equipped to handle the needs of asylum seekers. The government also pledged to invest in local communities that had been most affected by immigration, providing additional support for infrastructure, healthcare, and education services. But not everyone was satisfied with these measures. While some welcomed the government's response, others argued that the changes didn't go far enough. Some critics called for even stricter border controls, while others demanded a complete overhaul of the asylum system. There were calls to significantly reduce the number of asylum seekers entering the country, with some suggesting quotas for refugee admissions. As the situation unfolded, it became clear that this issue wasn't going to be resolved quickly. The government would need to strike a delicate balance between providing support for refugees and addressing the concerns of the British public. The protests had shown just how deeply divided the nation was on the issue of immigration. So, what does the future hold for UK immigration policies? Will these protests lead to lasting change? It seems likely that the UK government will continue to refine its approach to immigration in the coming years. The question is whether these changes will be enough to satisfy both the protesters and the broader public. One possible outcome is that the government will adopt a more restrictive approach to immigration, imposing stricter border controls and reducing the number of asylum seekers allowed into the country. Another possibility is that the government will continue to focus on improving the integration of refugees into British society, providing more support for them to find work and contribute to their local communities. At the same time, the government may also work more closely with local communities to ensure that immigration is distributed more evenly across the country. In areas that have seen an influx of asylum seekers, the government may increase funding and support to help these communities adjust to the changes. As we've seen, the issue of immigration in the UK is complex, and the protests of 2025 have highlighted the deep divisions in society. While the government has taken steps to address the concerns of the public, it's clear that the debate is far from over. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth discussions on this topic. Also, leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think? Will the UK government change its policies? Or are these protests just the beginning of a much bigger conversation?